between 1314 and 1328 for kings of France, leaving Edward III of England as next in line to the throne. The French nobility were unwilling to see Edward inherit the throne, so with the help of the Avignon papacy, crowned Charles's cousin Philip VI as king. Edward reluctantly accepted Philip as king and paid homage to him, something he had to do, because since the Norman invasion, the English have continued to hold land in the French kingdom. Initially this agreement worked, but in the 1330s that changed due to the outbreak of the Second Scottish Independence. Philip offered King David of Scotland refuge and threatened to come to Scotland's aid. The English in turn offered refuge to a claimant to the French Robert of Artois. So Philip sent a fleet into the Channel and in 1337 revoked Edward's ownership of Gascony. In response in 1340, Edward claimed the French throne and formed alliances with the nobility in the Low Countries with their help. The English navy emerged victorious at the Battle of Sluis and gained control over the English Channel for the remainder of the war. In 1341 the war spilled over into Brittany when both nations backed different claimants to the throne during the Succession War. But it wasn't until 1346 that Edward was able to raise a large enough army to invade France. He landed in Normandy and devastated the French at the Battle of Crecy and captured Calais. However, the war was halted with the arrival of the Black Death, and would only resume when Edward's son, the Black Prince, landed in Gascony in 1356. He crushed the French at Poitiers and captured the new French king, John II, and now without a king, France descended into lawlessness. The English, however, failed to take Rheims, so they made peace in 1360, expanding their holdings in France. King John's ransom, however, was not met and he died in England, leaving the new King Charles V with a lot to deal with. In the 1360s, the English backed the Montforts won in Brittany. Charles II of Navarre tried unsuccessfully to claim the Burgundian throne, and a civil war erupted in Castile. In Castile, the Black Prince helped defeat the French-backed claimant to the throne and keep Peter of Castile in power. However, this costly military excursion forced the Black Prince to raise taxes, angering local lords in Gascony, who appealed to Charles for help. Charles called the Black Prince to Paris to settle the issue, but he refused. So in 1369, English ownership of Gascony was revoked again and hostilities resumed, but the English were now in a much weaker position during this phase of the war. This is because French-backed Henry de Trastamare seized the throne of Castile in England. Peasants revolted, and the Black Prince and Edward III had died. Richard II, a child, became king, and he was unable to stop the French reclaiming most of their old territory within a few years, but his uncle, the powerful John of Gaunt, managed to stabilize the nation somewhat. But in 1381, he tried to claim the throne of Castile for himself. This was unsuccessful, however, and Richard made peace with the new king of France, Charles VI, in 1389. And internal strife in both nations stalled the war for a couple of decades. In England, Henry IV seized the throne, the Welsh rebelled, and the Scottish invaded. And in France, the new king, Charles VI, had mental problems, and two factions fought one another for power. The Armagnacs, led by the king's nephew, and the Burgundians, led by the king's cousin, John the Fearless. Finally, by 1415, Henry V, the new king of England, had stabilized his kingdom and hoped to exploit the turmoil in France. He landed on the continent and crushed the French at the Battle of Agincourt, killing nearly half of the French nobility in the process. This allowed the Burgundian faction to take control of Paris, as the English went on to capture most of Normandy. Over the following years in Paris, the Duke of Burgundy, John the Fearless, was assassinated in 1419 by Charles VI's son and heir, the future Charles VII. So Philip the Good, the new Duke of Burgundy, aligned himself with the English and forced the French to surrender. In 1420, the Treaty of Troyes saw Charles VI marry off his daughter to Henry and agreed that their children would inherit the Kingdom of France. However, Charles continued to fight, and in 1420 both Charles VI and Henry died. The new infant king of England, Henry VI, was, however, not crowned king of France. So in 1428, the English lay siege to Orleans. In the city, however, a peasant girl named Joan of Arc claimed to have spoken with God. She helped boost the morale of the French, who eventually broke through the siege and retook Rheims. There they crowned Charles VII of France as king, changing the momentum of the war. The Burgundians quickly left the war in 1435, leaving the English isolated, but they held out for another 15 years. The French army, however, quickly modernized and pushed the British out of Normandy by 1450 and Gascony by 1453. The war only formally ended in 1475, and the English were only left with Calais, and the humiliating defeat helped start the War of the Roses.